handle the truth.
And welcome, folks. This is Truth versus News for July 29th, the end of July. 7 months already gone. And what a week we had last week with those Mueller hearings. And this week with the ultra-rans and the Democratic debates. And I will say this is the home of the most dangerous minds in America. It's Jim Fetzer and Scott Bennett, and especially Jim Fetzer, who's written 6 books here. And all of them banned, and I say these books are just ideal books. I got them now, and I find out that like nobody died at Sandy Hook, and nobody died at Boston either. And I suppose we didn't go to the moon. And the Parkland Puzzle, let's see, political theater in Charlottesville. I'm doing this backwards here, and the Orlando to Dallas. And everywhere else. Well, these books are great, and they have an excellent good purpose. I find that I have one in the Louvre here in the bathroom, and I find that it really works really, really good. You just pick up any page, and it will really help you along because it'll scare the out of you. So
they've all been banned, Don.
They've all been banned. Yes. So, what other TV show in the world has got banned books?
Stunning stuff.
So this is where you're going to get something that nobody else will let you have, and that's the truth. And I think we'll just start off with the Mueller debacle.
Here we go. Dodgy Bobby. Robert Mueller deflected lawmakers' questions 198 times during his testimony on the Russia probe. Astounding. He asked lawmakers to repeat their questions 30 times, referred answers to his report 34 times, said questions were under his purview 10 times, said he can't or won't get into the substance of a question 99 times. Absolutely stunning. Mueller looked impressive in the past, maybe because he was tall, craggy, and handsome, but it was a disaster. Despite the high stakes and anticipation, he gave a flat, lackluster performance before lawmakers, took the stand to provide insight, but he refused to provide any additional details. Tight-lipped in his testimony, seemed to struggle to understand or hear lawmakers' questions, asked lawmakers to repeat their questions 30 times, referred to his report 34, excused himself from answering 10 times. Here he is. It was quite a circus, all things considered. When the Judiciary Committee Chairman, Democrat Jerry Nadler, asked Mueller if his investigation cleared Trump, he said no, without elaboration. However, his team never determined that Trump had committed any crime. He decided against charging Trump for the sake of finishing the investigation. Based on Justice Department policy and principles of fairness, we decide we would not make a determination as to whether the president committed a crime. Over the course of my career, I've seen a number of challenges to our democracy, Mueller said. The Russian government's effort to interfere in our election is among the most serious, but it was all poppycock. It was really insulting. And John Radcliffe made the obvious but crucial point, namely that Mueller was operating on the presumption that Trump was guilty unless proven innocent, which he called him out. I believe this may have been the most important 5 minutes of the entire hearing. Listen up.
Summarize your opening statement this morning. You said in volume 1 on the issue of conspiracy, the special counsel determined that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. And then in volume 2, For reasons that you explained, the special counsel did not make a determination on whether there was an obstruction of justice crime committed by the president. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, in explaining that special counsel did not make what you called a traditional prosecution or declination decision, the report on the bottom of page 2 of volume 2 reads as follows. The evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that prevent us from conclusively determining that no criminal conduct occurred. Accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. Now, I read that correctly?
Yes.
All right. Now, your report, and today you said that all times the special counsel team operated under, was guided by, and followed Justice Department policies and principles. So, which DOJ policy or principle sets forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined?
Can you repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah. Which DOJ policy or principle set forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined? Where does that language come from, Director? Where is the DOJ policy that says that? Can you, let me make it easier.
Go ahead.
Can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined?
I cannot, but this is a unique situation.
Well, you can't, time is short, I've got 5 minutes. Let's just leave it at, you can't find it because I'll tell you why. It doesn't exist. The special counsel's job, nowhere does it say that you were to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or that the special counsel report should determine whether or not to exonerate him. It's not in any of the documents. It's not in your appointment order. It's not in the special counsel regulations. It's not in the OLC opinions. It's not in the Justice Manual, and it's not in the principles of federal prosecution. Nowhere do those words appear together because respectfully, Director, it was not the special counsel's job to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or to exonerate him because the bedrock principle of our justice system is a presumption of innocence.
Yep.
It exists for everyone. Everyone is entitled to it, including sitting presidents. And because there is a presumption of innocence, prosecutors never, ever need to conclusively determine it. Now, Director, the special counsel applied this inverted burden of proof that I can't find and you said doesn't exist anywhere in the department policies, and you used it to write a report. And the very first line of your report, says,
Yes.
read this morning, it authorizes the special counsel to provide the Attorney General with a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions reached by the special counsel. That's the very first word of your report, right?
That's correct.
Here's the problem, Director. The special counsel didn't do that. On volume 1, you did. On volume 2, with respect to potential obstruction of justice, the special counsel made neither a prosecution decision or a declination decision. You made no decision. You told us this morning and in your report that you made no determination. So respectfully, Director, you didn't follow the special counsel regulations. It clearly says, write a confidential report about decisions reached. Nowhere in here does it say, write a report about decisions that weren't reached. You wrote 180 pages about decisions that weren't reached, about potential crimes that weren't charged or decided. And respectfully, by doing that, you managed to violate every principle and the most sacred of traditions about prosecutors not offering extra prosecutorial analysis about potential crimes that aren't charged. So Americans need to know this as they listen to the Democrats and socialists on the other side of the aisle, as they do dramatic readings from this report, that volume 2 of this report was not authorized under the law to be written. It was written to a legal standard that does not exist at the Justice Department. And it was written in violation of every DOJ principle about extra prosecutorial commentary. I agree with the chairman this morning when he said Donald Trump is not above the law. He's not. But he damn sure shouldn't be below the law, which is where volume 2 of this report puts him.
Outstanding.
Completely appropriate.
Right.
It was obvious that Mueller didn't write the report. That's a reason, no doubt, he was hesitant to testify. So someone else had done it. Everything is trying to make sense. The biggest takeaway from Wednesday's congressional hearing was how unfamiliar he was with his own report. He had no clue who Glenn Simpson or Fusion GPS was. He literally told one congressman who questioned him he wasn't familiar with that part of the report. Even the Trump-hating mainstream ran headlines calling Mueller frail, confused, lost, doddering. What happened? Turns out Andrew Weissman has been identified as a driving force behind the Mueller witch hunt. He has a history of using his office as a weapon against political opponents. He's a massive Hillary partisan. Sidney Powell has written about him. A former federal prosecutor and author of a book about Enron, the failed energy company, Powell explains how Andrew Weissman, the second in command at the Mueller investigation, has a history of using the power of his office to destroy political opponents. Years ago, when Mueller was director of the FBI, he chose Weissman to head the Enron task force. Powell says Weissman targeted the Arthur Andersen accounting firm, which employed 85,000 people.
Wow.
An impeccable reputation at the time, and smashed the company by falsely accusing it of destroying evidence and of committing a crime that does not exist. The Supreme Court would unanimously overturn the case, but by then the damage had been done. Powell says Weissman intimidated witnesses by threatening indictments, created crimes that do not exist, and withheld evidence that could have aided the accused. Weissman is accused of using the same tactics in the Mueller investigation against Trump. And I think there's really no doubt about it. Scott.
Well, Jim, there's a lot to pack into that first segment, starting out with the doddering old fool who resembles Homer Simpson's father, Mueller, and I can't remember my name, drooling out the side of his mouth. I don't have any mercy or patience for Mueller because we know he's got blood on his hands from 9/11. We know he was part of the massive conspiracy of 9/11 and covering up the video evidence by confiscating the cameras that were around the Pentagon. We know there was no Pentagon, a plane that hit the Pentagon. I know that with my own eyes because I drove by it the next day. There was no plane, there was no tail, there was no engines, there was no luggage, there was no yellow tape. And of course, you've confirmed it in your excellent book, Jim, talking about things like the CNN reporter who came out and said there's no evidence of a plane here, and his feed was shut down. So Mueller was part of that cover-up, that conspiracy, the greatest crime in the history of the United States, if not humanity. Never mind going back in time, and I think the LaRouche organization does an excellent work in the analysis of Mueller. They've got a publication all about him, as well as the GCHQ and the British ties to the corruption. Mueller, of course, goes back to Oklahoma. So Mueller's got blood on his hands and really should be hung for treason. That being said, this testimony that he gave, of course, was not the Black Knight sword-wielding Darth Vader, sharp, cunning, hard-hitting acrobat of language and legal razor-sharp precision that people expected or hoped for, the Democrats wanted. And he was just kind of fumbling between medicated breaths, and he was drooling, and he was stuttering, and looks like he was waiting out the time. So everybody pounced on him. Jordan, Gates, Nunes, Ratcliffe, they all really just destroyed him by letting him destroy himself. And the American people sort of heard that, I don't listen to Gutfeld or whatever his name is on Fox, but he said some funny things yesterday. He said, people expected to get puppies when Mueller came. Instead, they got rabies. Mueller came and they expected to get all these good things, and they got garbage and disease and crap. And that's been the abuse on the American people for 2.5 years. The Democrats are responsible. Mueller's responsible. But the good thing is the whole story has imploded. It is destroyed itself. And now the Republicans are turning. There's a massive political paradigm shift that's now occurring, and they're going to go on the hunt. They're going to go on the attack. They're going to come in from all sides. All sides are converging on Nazi Germany, Berlin, otherwise known as the Fascist Democrat Party. And they're coming in from Russia. They're coming in from Italy. They're coming in from Normandy. That is Barr, Inspector General, the reappointment of special CIA and DIA people, including, here's the biggest thing that just happened, Jim, John Ratcliffe has now been appointed by President Trump to take over for Dan Coats. So John Ratcliffe, which you just saw in that clip, one of the sword-wielding musketeers with the razor-sharp rapier of a wordsmith, is now going to be going in and taking over for Dan Coats. And I think that's a good sign. Trump needs to fire all of these people that have been in his administration for the last 3 years or whatever it is. They're all worthless except for the new people that seem to be appointed. Now, I don't know how good Ratcliffe is or how dirty he is or what, but I'm welcoming a change because we know Bolton's a failure. We know Pompeo's an idiot sluggard. We know Gina Haspel was a traitor. We know these dual Israeli Zionist citizens like Sigal Mandelwecker in the U.S. Department of Treasury, who put on sanctions on New Horizon Conference, probably because I went there with Phil Giraldi, with Mike Maloof. They don't care if artists and banjo-playing musicians go there, but they get the shit scared out of them when Scott Bennett or Mike Maloof or Phil Giraldi or J. Michael Springman or other people from the State Department, CIA, and such go over there with open hearts and patriotic, dreams to say, let's make peace and deal and let's get stability. Let's stop all these wars. And here are these Zionist elements in President Trump's administration undermining all of that, undermining his original promises, undermining his promises to make friends with Russia, get us out of Syria, and make hopefully good deals with Iran. But I'll end it by saying this is the paradigm shift. This is the moment when the Democrats fall apart. They've destroyed themselves from 2020. I think Donald Trump's reaction on the green of the White House was excellent because he said the Democrats have less than zero. They started with zero, now they're less than zero. They're in debt, right? They're betting and they're hoping and they're borrowing from the bank. And now the American people are going to go, you're done. You're removed from the game. So with John Ratcliffe, and I anticipate other people appointed, you're now going to see people go on the attack, and I can't wait. And we won't get too much into Sidney Powell because I don't want to let the bad guys know, but she's going to be the secret weapon, Jim, because she knows where all of the bodies are buried, and she certainly knows shell game and how it relates to all the people. And I'm telling you, I'm looking forward to lining these people up and doing a firing squad like it's never been done before, according to constitutional process. Jim?
She appears to be a formidable figure.
Yeah,
John, were you like?
Just really quickly, it looks like what we've seen here is a Peter principle practice to the nth degree here. People rising to the level of incompetence and beyond. And I think we've spent the last couple of years in a real sham. It's just not good. And so this is no way to run a country. And I think it's time to clear house. Yes, get them out of there. Start anew.
It's not the Peter principle, Don. It's corruption. It's levels of corruption. The bigger turns are in. Nothing short of a disaster for Democrats.
Right.
Former special counsel Robert Mueller testified before the House, demonstrating a loose knowledge of his own report, calling even further headaches for the resistance party. Mueller himself warned his testimony would consist solely of his already public 448-page report. CNR Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel called the hearing political theater. Just like that, both Mueller's prediction and McDaniel's assessment came to fruition. Perhaps Fox News' Chris Wallace described it best when he labeled the charade a disaster for the Democrats and a devastating blow to Mueller's own reputation. So now we know why Mueller didn't want to testify. Now, this article is from Dana Milback. He's a very Zionist, he's a left-wing zealot. So that Dana Milback is so troubled by this is very, very telling. This is the best possible spin he could put on it. So maybe this is why Robert Mueller didn't want to testify. For 2 years, he was a silent man behind the curtain, all-knowing and all-powerful, revered by Democrats, feared by President Trump. But when he finally sat before Congress for nearly 7 hours on Wednesday, the former special counsel seemed remarkably weak. He looked dazed and confused as he listened, mouth agape, to his questioners, often struggling to identify who was talking. He stammered, licked his lips, consulted his aide, and begged forbearance. Could you repeat that, ma'am? And what was the question, sir, if I might? I'm sorry, could you again repeat the question? Democrats tried to defend Mueller by recalling his heroism in Vietnam and his lengthy service as a Republican appointee. But even this was a struggle. Which president appointed you to become United States Attorney for Massachusetts? Asked Representative Greg Stanton, Democrat of Arizona. Which senator? A puzzled Mueller asked. Which president? Stanton repeated. Oh, which president? Mueller paused. I think that was President Bush. A buzz in the hearing. According to my notes, it was President Ronald Reagan, Stanton coached. My mistake, Mueller said. Democrats were disappointed. The speaker didn't speak boldly. Republicans were delighted, but for this honorable public servant, it was above all a sad coda to a grand career. Sad for Mueller because he did not come off as commanding or authoritative, but more sad for the country because once again he failed to train the spotlight on ongoing foreign interference in our elections. When he issued his report in the spring, Mueller seemed to be operating under the assumption that everything was on the level, that people would digest and analyze his findings honestly. In this sense, he is an anachronism, a man from a time when people behaved as honorably as he does. This was naive. Again, Dana Milbank trying to give his best spin in trying to remain above the fray. He seemed unable to mount the forceful defense needed of his work, his staff, and the FBI. Meanwhile, he was cautious and lawyerly. Republicans demolished him. Mueller was fundamentally unfair, threw a bunch of stuff up against the wall to see what would stick, managed to violate every principle, wrote a one-sided attack on the president, had an amazing double standard, was a guest on a quest to stop Trump, left out significant exculpatory evidence, most regurgitated press stories, was disruptive to the American people, perpetuated the Russia hoax. Inevitably, Trump joined in the attack on this decent man. Quoting Fox News' Chris Wallace, the president tweeted, "This has been a disaster for the Democrats and a disaster for the reputation for Robert Mueller." Sadly, the part about Mueller, Dana writes, was true, but so is the part about the Democrats. Meanwhile, FOIA docs show the Obama administration pushed the proliferated the Russiagate hoax. Conservatives long suspected the Russiagate trail led back to President Obama. He campaigned vigorously for Hillary before the 2016 election, went on TV numerous times speaking ill of Donald Trump. It was obvious he did not want Trump to be elected. Newly released documents show those suspicions about Obama and his administration were warranted. Thanks to the government watchdog group Judicial Watch, which I applaud, and the Daily Caller News Foundation, it's obvious the Obama State Department helped orchestrate the targeting of Donald Trump as early as 2012. Here's what we know for certain from these newly released documents. Obama's State Department was at the center of an effort to target President Trump with accusations of collusion with Russia. Emails show that senior Obama State Department officials orchestrated the advancement of the Russia collusion hoax previous to the 2016 presidential election. One September 2016 email exchange between Special Coordinator for Libya Jonathan Weiner and Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland concerned a face-to-face meeting on a Russian matter. This communication is of special note because Weiner is a close associate to Russian dossier author Christopher Steele. He's been implicated in coordinating with Hillary associate Sidney Blumenthal and Steele to circulate the anti-Trump dossier. Weiner wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post, also September 2016, in which he stated, "Steele and I met in Washington to discuss the information now known as the dossier. I prepared a 2-page summary and shared it with Nuland, who indicated that, like me, she felt the Secretary of State needed to be made aware of this material, as though she hadn't been behind it from the beginning." 1 month later, Steele visited the State Department in October 2016 and briefed officials about his work on the infamous dossier. He began investigating Trump in June of 2016 under a contract with Fusion GPS, which was funded by presidential candidate Hillary Clinton and the DNC. Then Assistant Secretary of State Nuland claimed to have first seen the first of Steele's memos, the dossier on June 20th, and the last in mid-July. She told the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr, I was first shown excerpts of the dossier, I believe in mid-July of 2016. It wasn't the complete thing, which I didn't see until it was published in the U.S. press. Lunan told CBS Face the Nation on Feb 4, 2018, that the FBI should investigate if one candidate or the election as a whole might be influenced by the Russian Federation. She would later claim she was not aware of the Steele State Department briefing until afterwards. Another unrelated yet still terrifying shocker these documents showed was the intel community under Obama was continuing their unlawful spying on American citizens. The documents noted that 85% of all use extraction of the NASA database was unlawful, and they were searching many of the same Americans repeatedly over different dates. This means Pacific Americans were being targeted, tracked, and monitored. Meanwhile, we have multiple reports of the Mueller hearings having been an unmitigated disaster for the Democrats, let me emphasize, and where, as Scott has noted, Trump has nominated Don Ratcliffe to replace Dan Coats as intel chief, where Coats, it appears, was even the source of an insider memoranda about the resistance within the Trump administration to Trump's own actions and activities as a democratically elected president of the United States, which appears to have been authored by Dan Coats as the then director of national intelligence. Good riddance to Coats, and welcome, John Ratcliffe. Scott.
Right. Mute.
Yeah, there we go. Well, yeah, I echo your affirmation, Jim. Dan Coats stepping down is the wise thing that Donald Trump has done. I don't presume to be an expert in his strategic mind. I've criticized him where I think he's made some missteps and got tackled where he could have scored touchdowns. But at the same time, I applaud when he does score touchdowns. Donald Trump is, of course, far better than anything Hillary Clinton would ever be and anything the Democrats are. So I think his majority of policies are positive for America. And I think this domestic policy, putting to death, like St. George killing the dragon, is what Trump has accomplished, but really doing nothing but letting this play out. He's been enormously transparent. His lawyers have been transparent. He's got some bad people around him, but at the same time, I think they are being pushed out and eaten away. Donald Trump has had some positive things in that direction, criticizing Bolton and others. But this fundamentally was the singular most significant event in Donald Trump's presidential history because, again, he's put to death the dragon. These Democrats, these fascist, violent, anti-American thugs and bullies and liars supported by their propagandists in the mainstream media at CNN and MSNBC, who have been whoremongering themselves and putting this nonsense out there. This is at last coming into the full center of the scope, crosshairs, legal analysis spectrum. And that's all that matters. Emotional politics is one thing, but legal facts and reason and logic and the presentation of evidence and the testimony and the coordination of that, linking it to crimes against the American public, federal crimes, treason, abuse of government authority, misprision of treason. I would even add aiding and abetting terrorist financing. I think the whole reason that this was started, I've said it before, I'll say it again, was because from 2009 and 2012, there were a lot of dirty things that the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton were doing under the guise of the State Department in Libya, in Syria, and elsewhere. And again, Rene Alexander Acosta played a role in it. He played a role in the Swiss bank terrorist financing UBS case. And Hillary Clinton and everybody in Congress knew about this in 2012. And then it went public through Russian television, crosstalk. And that's when they started, I think, recognizing that they were getting sniper hits from Americans through international TV, exposing like a redwood tree being banged up against a drawbridge, this massive corruption, this abuse of government, this pay to play. this incarceration of American citizens like Brad Birkenfeld, like Scott Bennett, the coordination of Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and all of this. That's one of the major mushroom explosions over Hiroshima that occurred, and they've been suffering the radioactive toxicity ever since. And Trump knows this, and all the others know this, but it's now beginning to, it's really now beginning to wither them and weaken them. So I think all of this is going to be changing in the direction of a full prosecution. The Democrats have nothing. They fired all their ammunition. They don't even have muskets to swing as clubs. The metal and their guns and the wood stock is deteriorating by their own lies. So the Democrats have nothing except to tear their clothes off, light themselves on fire, and scream like stuck pigs in the hopes of scaring people into, okay, all right, we'll make a deal, we'll compromise. No, we're not. Here's the thing that I get. The American people have, everybody's thrown up in their life, you get that upset stomach, you get the watering feeling in the back of your throat, and then suddenly whatever was in there vomits out. I think that's a very applicable analogy to the condition the American people are feeling towards this, because it is so complicated unless you've lived it like we have. It's difficult to understand the origins and the process, but every American recognized this Russia hoax and propaganda was evil, was corrupt. There was something wrong. There was something abusive just because of the bullying attitude of these Democrats. And nobody likes Weissman. I mean, talk about a man you love to hate. This guy is the scum of humanity. Sidney Powell knows it well. But Americans had that upset stomach. And now, with all of this testimony, the water in the back of the throat is coming up. Now it is a few seconds before the full vomiting comes out. And that's what Americans are going to do in 2020. It's going to take another 6 months of layering this, of exposing this, of getting testimony, of putting these people on the stand and watching them stutter and stammer and fall backwards because they're right in a corner. They have nowhere to go. And they're gonna act like traumatic fools. You're gonna have false flag shootings like we have in Gilroy. You're gonna have all sorts of Antifa protests and backwardses. You may have floods against the border because these are all distraction operations. I know that. I worked in this area. Deception operations to lure people to look to a different way. You're gonna have possible explosions in the Persian Gulf and stuff because all of that is distraction away from the core of the cancer in America is this. It was Obama. It started under Bush and Cheney. They should be executed, of course, too. But it started under Obama, and for 8 years, we've been constipated with all this poison. Trump's the enema, cleaning us out. I'll use that because I like that analogy. But now the American people are really about to vomit it out. And that is, they're going to vomit out all the lies and the perversion and the corruption that they've been fed by the Democrats and the media. They won't take it anymore. When they vomit it out, it's going to be a violent political, not just voting, but they're going to pound their fist on the voting block and say, damn you, Democrats, I'm voting Republican just because I'm going to vomit you out like the lukewarm scum water that you are. And I think that you're going to see a devastating overthrow of the Democrats in 2020. And all Trump needs to do is replay this and replay this masterful script. This is the political script politicians are waiting for. He's played defense, and now he can say, American people, what they did to me, they did to you. They utilized and weaponized the intelligence community, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the State Department. They worked with foreign spies like Christopher Steele at MI6. They enlisted the help of our most trusted allies at Australia and elsewhere. And our press were involved. Michael Isikoff was involved. Tom Hamburger was involved. The Washington Post. All of these agents were desperate to overthrow your vote, the American people, who wanted a change and wanted me to come in as an outsider, as a maverick, as a dynamic, as an expulsion force, as a enema force to clean out all this corruption that's been backed up in the bowels of the American body politic. They wanted to keep all this sickness, and I was exposing it and expelling it. And you now have to expel the Democrats in 2020. Then we can be America, a city on a hill. Then we can return to peace. Now we can achieve balance in our time and make friends with Russia, get us out of the Middle East, make a deal with Iran, and not be subject to the slavery of Saudi Arabia or Israel. And of course, the other thing is Trump has given so much to Israel and Netanyahu with the Golan Heights and the embassy, and now they got a coin with Trump on it. The political advantage now is Trump can set Netanyahu to a corner and say, you sit over there, don't talk to me, I'm going to now talk to Iran. And Netanyahu can't make a squawking Pete like the Chihuahua he is because Trump's given him the political money. He said, here's your embassy, here's your Golan Heights, now go sit down and shut up. I'm going to talk to Iran. And that's something that Duran did a very good analysis of. So I think Trump is now in a position, whether he intended it or not, but he's now in a position to do some positive foreign policy stuff like Korea with Russia and Iran following the Korean model and expelling all of these people around him for new leadership. And Ratcliffe and all of that is coming. And Epoch Times, Jim, I'll say in closing, is an excellent source, unclassified on the Epoch Times on YouTube that does an excellent job consistently connecting this and breaking it down. They missed a few things, but we've been working with them on a lot of the other stuff. But you're going to see this over the next year, I think, turn into one of the major political communication strategies that Trump can just expel all of these people out. And the American people are going to vomit them out. They're slow to learn, but when Americans grasp what's really happened here, and I think they do now, they're going to be violent politically overthrowing. They're not going to tolerate one whisper from Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar or any of the fool presidential candidates on the Democrat side that are up there spouting all their nonsense. The American people are just going to say, shut up. You've lied to us for 2 or 3 years. You've traumatized us. You've stole our tax money on a report that never should have happened. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick.
Excellent. Go ahead.
That's most excellent, all outstanding. And I will say that it seems like these people that are all on the wrong side have all been influenced by the deep state, and they've been able to be manipulated because they have their personal goals in getting rich and stuff and being influenced above their principles. And so they were manipulated, and they've been fed for the last couple of years a bunch of bullshit. So it's just really happening, and Scott revealed it all, a lot of it back in the early 2012 in his book Shell Game, showing all the corruption, all the money dealings that brought us to this state here. It's just really something. So I really think that we have to just come back and show a little pride and do some good things here. So I think it's time that the Republicans and Americans all support the truth and the righteousness instead of going along with his agenda that has destroyed us.
Meanwhile, Jeffrey Epstein found nearly unconscious
Yeah, this guy.
in a jail cell after possible suicide attempt, except as a narcissist, he's not going to commit suicide. This may be an attempted murder, strangulation, or it might be a gesture to get himself transferred to a hospital. Those are the only options. A multimillionaire financier was taken to a nearby hospital. Unclear how he suffered his neck injuries. Investigators think he might have done it to get himself either on purpose, I rule that out, or a ploy to get transferred out of the jail. Also possible is attacked by another inmate. I think that's much more probable. He was, of course, busted on July 6th on sex trafficking and conspiracy charges. We know a lot about it. Epstein, being held, was found semi-conscious, marks on his neck. Fourth source said the assault had not been ruled out and that another inmate was questioned. The inmate has been identified as Nicholas Tartaglione, according to 2 sources. A former police officer in Westchester County was arrested in December of 2016, accused of killing 4 men in an alleged cocaine distribution conspiracy, then burying their bodies in his yard, which is, I think, quite an open and shut case against him. So he might be very compliant with those who think they could give him a break if he'd perform actions on their part, because there are an awful lot of powerful people who would like nothing better for the Jeffrey Epstein to turn up dead. Meanwhile, why the Epstein Mossad honey trap story has disappeared from Kurt Nemo If you search the news, you'll find very little or nothing in the corporate media about pedo Jeffrey Epstein's connection to Israeli intelligence. This connection is obvious from his ties to Zionist Les Wexner, and especially his Mossad handler, Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of documented Mossad operative and double agent Robert Maxwell. It said Ghislaine had a romantic relationship with him in 1992, but that would appear to be a cover story. Maxwell was rather his Mossad liaison. She also procured and trained teenage girls to work as honey traps. The story in the corporate media following Epstein's arrest is that Ghislaine recruited girls for him and his associates, many rich and influential. It described as simply a pedophile sex ring when it obviously was much more. A blackmail operation designed to compromise politicians and others if and when they deviated from the Zionist agenda. This has already swirled and descended into the memory hole. Headlines focus instead on the appeal of Epstein's bail denial, the red flags raised about his jail records and work release, his close ties to Wall Street and Barclays, and the taint on the money he gave to Harvard and other institutions over the years. Much attention dwells on the salacious natures of his pedophilia. Meanwhile, disgraced former Labor Secretary Alex Acosta's remarks on Epstein's intelligence connections, which Acosta has since denied, fade as a separate corporate sensationalism, and miasma dominate and shape the story. Leslie Wexner is described as the most prominent client of Epstein's alleged money management firm. However, it appears that Wexner was the only client, and he wasn't so much a client as a conduit for money poured into a Zionist blackmail operation. A Twitter account under Quintain theorized that Epstein's main purpose was to blackmail politicians and wealthy perverts. There's no about it, really. You don't need to charge up front, just get them to have underage sex, then blackmail them afterwards for hush money. Better, but you're still a liability. Producing and receiving big bribe money raises big question. The scheme works just as well if the billionaires are in on it from the get-go as a way to buy sex. I assume that was obvious, but perhaps not. There's no need to invoke the mafia, Russia, Mossad, CIA, etc. That's just needlessly overfitting, except it's not overfitting at all. It's the only explanation that makes sense. Undoubtedly, Epstein bribed these people to invest in his offshore fund. It's unlikely a criminal scheme like this would have lasted for decades. The wealthy and influential have the money and resources to deal with ordinary blackmailers. However, as Robert Maxwell discovered, it would be extremely foolish to expose the double cross of Mossad or the CIA and Russian intel unless you want to be found floating dead off the Canary Islands or hanging in your mother's backyard by the so-called DC madam.
Wow.
Even if a few names are put out there for the sake of a corporate meeting frenzy, the real story will never be fully revealed. Israel will not suffer consequences beyond speculation that it will be dismissed as the anti-Semitic ravings of conspiracy theorists. Meanwhile, our ruling elites have no idea how much we want to see them all in prison jumpsuits. This is just revealing how much there's a great crisis that we're going to be posited for the next decade. This is the presumption of the fourth turning of four-generational cycle of 80 years that correlates rather neatly with the great crises of the past. 1781, the Revolutionary War and Constitutional Crisis, 1861 Civil War, 1941 World War II, Global War. What will be the next crisis? Some anticipate another great power war, others a civil war, other a military coup, other the collapse of the economy. However, the author posits a novel crisis, a moral crisis in which people challenge the power of the nation's corrupt ruling elites, not just elected officials, but the technocrats of the deep state, the vested interests pillaging the nation, the new overlords of big tech, the financier new nobility, the corporate media, and the self-serving state corporate technocrat nomenclature who do the dirty work for the ruling elite. Divide and conquer has been the absurdly easy strategy of the elite to fragment and disempower the citizens. It's child play to ceaselessly promote a baker's dozens of divisive issues via the corporate media and then watch the resulting conflict split the citizens into fragmented corps who subdivide further with every new toxic injection. The one issue that could unite the fragmented citizenry, however, is moral revulsion.
Yep.
Einstein case promises to reveal there's literally no limit to the excess and exploitations of the privileged few in America. No limit on what our ruling elites can do with absolute impunity. The nobility of the feudal era had some reciprocal obligation to its serfs. Our new nobility has no obligation to anyone but themselves. It's painfully obvious there are two sets of laws in America. Bankers can rip off billions and never serve time. Members of the protected class sexually exploit children, get a wrist slap, if that. Here's the sad reality. Everyone in the ruling elite looks the other way. All the self-described patriots in the intel services, all the technocrats in the departments of justice, state, the Pentagon, and so on. Everybody with any power knows the whole class of ruling elites is completely corrupt by definition. To secure power in the U.S., you have to sell your soul to the devil one way or another.
That's right.
Appears to be the exception. Like all ruling elites, Americans are absolutely confident in their power. This is hubris taken to new heights. But the citizenry can finally have enough of their corrupt, self-serving overlords. It doesn't seem in the realm of possibility to the protected few, but it might actually happen. It seems improbable in such a distracted culture, but consider the chart below. Even the most distracted, fragmented tribe of the peasantry eventually notice they're not in the top 1% or the top 1/10 of 1%. Our ruling elite have no idea how many of us already want to see them in prison jumpsuits. They have no idea how fast the moral revulsion with their corrupt leadership might spread. Scanning the distracted consumerist rabble from the great heights of their wealth and power, they reckon the capacity for moral outrage is limited, leaving them safe from any domestic crusade. But that might prove to be an illusion. Scott.
Well, I think that is an excellent demonstration of why the internet and the alternative media are producing such excellent, clear, rational, reasonable communication, scholarship, and presentations of truth. And Don's show is one of those lights that is illuminating the darkness. And this article is exactly that too, Jim. And it's always inspiring to read and to see people saying what we've been saying and think also, because it means that America is waking up out of the Ulysses intoxicated lotus flowers, if you recall from Odysseus in his travels, when men ate the lotus flower and fell asleep into the fantasy of their dreams. They don't want to wake up. They don't want to come out of that. They want to exist in the perpetual fantasy of intoxicating American patriotism and materialism, and everything is great today and it will be the same tomorrow. That's a grand delusion. And those of us who sense something is wrong since really the 1990s, I think America started going downhill after the death of since Ronald Reagan left office, and that traitor George H.W. the father W. Bush came in, and then Clinton, the pedophile and the rapist, and then George Bush, the village idiot, and then run by Dick Cheney, the sodomite child molester, and then Obama, the transvestite homosexual lover, and now the Hillary Clinton Skigsian witch. Donald Trump was a refreshing breath of cleansing. Again, he is the I'll say it again, oh, Don, help me out here. What is the term I was just using? The expelling force that removes the toxicity, whatever it is, from the constipation we've been suffered for the last 20, 30 years. And now we're seeing, the ruling elites and their detachment and their abuse of the American people is all becoming very much apparent in the internet days. So one thing that comes out to me, of course, is that the reason that America has really emerged in such a warmongering fashion is because we have projected upon other nations the same reflection of our own fury and discontent. And we think every other nation is as crazy and bloodthirsty as we are. So for that reason, we have to threaten war and build the military and the military industrial complex and and plant bases everywhere across the world. And the world is looking at us with estrangement, with a detachment, almost like you're a mad dog chasing your tail. Iran is not a threat to the United States of America. It is not going to invade Alaska or Florida. It does not have grand designs to conquer the world for Islam. All of that is propaganda. I've been to Iran. I've seen it. I know it. Neither is Russia the existential threat to America. They are all looking at us with an estrangement. What is wrong with you? Why are you behaving with such belligerence and animosity? What is the problem? And the problem, of course, is the Zionist element that has been pushing for the geopolitical expansion of Israel using the Greater Ota Danan project and the military-industrial complex, which feeds off like parasites this endless bureaucratic funding of the war complex that's been out of control since September 11th, 2001. But all of that, I think, is coming to a close, and the inevitability of a social uprising, a civil war in America, is already upon us, because conservatives are not starting anything. Contrary to Ilhan Omar's statement that all white men should be recognized as the #1 threat to the United States and the real terrorist, which is a blatant lie and a bigoted foolishness. And she's, any good that she said is suddenly destroyed under the weight of that ignorance and that corrupt perversion, and as well as Ocasio-Cortez, the Skigsian witch crew called the Squad, coming in and regurgitating this violent, fascist, socialistic, environmental worship nonsense, is alienating America. The Democrats have alienated America, and the Republicans haven't done themselves any favors. But there's a real resurgence of conservatives, libertarians, and Republicans that you see in the appointment of Ratcliffe. You're going to see in Jordan, and the removal of people like Amash and these other, anti-Trump type of personalities. They're all being weaned off. And I think the great thing that is going to happen in 2020 is going to be the reestablishment, the reawakening of Americans, that this country, this constitution, this government belongs to them, and this coup d'etat that was attempted to be orchestrated will never be tolerated again. And that could come from also a violent sort of not physically violent, but a violent political reawakening of the role of sheriffs in counties, and the reclaiming of counties and towns and cities in America to be controlled not by the federal government, by the state government. That's one thing that just emerged out of this false flag shooting, most likely in Gilroy. The alcohol, tobacco, and firearms group, the federal agency of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, supposedly is down at Gilroy investigating, doing an operation. That is not their purview. They do not have jurisdiction in this matter. It is not a federal matter. So a federal agency cannot set foot on a crime scene because it is a local matter. It is a state of California matter. It is a Gilroy matter. It is not a matter for the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms federal agency. So these sort of things need to be stopped and rolled back. And hopefully Trump is smart enough to do that through announcing the Second Amendment executive order that all Americans have the right to carry. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, Scott, to stay with Gilroy for a few more minutes, it seems to me the very presence of ATF there is suspicious in and of itself, that this was a contrived event, that it's another effort to promote the Democrats' gun control agenda. And you, before we went on the air, were talking about how some of the witnesses seemed to be in sync with one another as though they were on a script. Would you like to review the bidding there? Because from what I've seen on television, as say in Orlando, you see lots of red lights, lots of vehicles. You don't see any bodies. I saw a noticeable dearth of ambulances. They weren't there in Orlando, they weren't there at Sandy Hook, they weren't there in Boston, and it looks as though they're not there in Gilroy either.
Well, in Gilroy, they say they've killed a 6-year-old boy and something else, but they haven't said how many have been wounded. They haven't said how many shell casings they picked up. And of course, we know the amount of wounded is always at least twice the amount dead. So if you have 3 dead, you'll have at least, 6 to 10 to 18 wounded, because people get ricocheted, they get nicked, they get hit in legs or ankles or whatever it is. That wasn't the case. And the most telling thing on the video, they had 2 people. They had a woman and a guy, girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, I'm not sure. They were young. The guy looked a little militant, big, military looking guy or cop looking guy, not that bright. And the woman looked, sort of beta-ish. And they're talking, and the reporter said, "How would you describe that?" And the guy said, "Oh, this is chaos," and he chuckled. Let us return to that. The Gilroy shooting, which allegedly has just occurred, is now the time to download as much material, video that we can before it's scrubbed from the internet, because as we've seen in the New Zealand shooting, as well as the Las Vegas shooting, oddities and inconsistencies will appear. One of the first ones I've seen were with 2 people that were interviewed, and they both were prompted to say this was real. This was a real event. The guy said first, when the reporter said, "How would you summarize it?" "Well, it was real." And the girl instantly said, "Yeah, it was real. It was real." So real seems to be the impressionable part. Now we're also most likely going to hear, "I don't want prayers, I want gun control." So if you hear that coming out of the future, we don't want prayers, we want gun control. That's the mantra, that's the psyop, and this is another part of the distraction operation to pull us away from the real cancer, which is this whole deep state attack and agenda. Go ahead.
And when these events are real, no one feels the urge to say it was real, because they lived through it, they know it was real. It would be an absurd thing to say otherwise. And the Democrats are going to persist in ignoring the role of defensive use of guns to protect American citizens between 500,000 and 3 million times a year, which have estimated to save as many as 200,000 American lives every single year. So the Democrats, based on these phony staged events, are going to take away our right, our ability to defend ourselves, and add to the rolls of the dead Americans, but to the tune of 200,000 or more every single year. And no doubt, Scott, the bad guys will be emboldened by turning America into a free fire zone, and that number is going to climb astronomically.
Jim, one of the other tells was this. Someone wrote in the article, this is on Fox News. You can see the story on Fox News and read it. And allegedly, one witness at the shooting said to the gunman, "Why are you doing this?" As if someone is going to say, "Please, Mr. Gunman, why are you doing this?" Like little Cindy Lou, and when the Grinch is stealing the Christmas tree, and the guy says in response, "Because I'm angry." So you have a witness.
Right.
"Why are you doing this, Mr. Shooter?" And he's like, "Because I'm angry."
Yeah, okay. And we're going to end this hour here. The Truth versus News for July 29th here. And a lot of the show has been stick around to the second half. It should be fantastic. And also, Truth is all the other side of all the loss. That's it.